Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Common Council meeting for Tuesday, May 8th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Here.
Alderman Bushy.
Here.
Alderman Meyer.
Here. Alderman
Worth.
Here.
Alderman Garrow.
Here.
Alderman Brian Schneider. Here. Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Nurbin.
Here.
Mayor Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum. First item is a public hearing for Ordinance 1518, amending the city zoning code to rezone the property located at 11649 Northport Washington Road from B3 Office, LTD Overlay, and PUD Planned Unit Development to R6 Suburban Residential Attached and B3 Office Limited LTD and PUD, and amending the city land use plan from office to residential plex and office. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in March, and the first reading was at the Common Council in April.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second. Motion and second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council on this item? Seeing none.
Move to close public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Next item is personal appearance and public comment. Citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time. It appears we have someone that wishes to do so at this time, and that is
Yes, I
Ms.
do.
Bouquet.
Thank you very much. My name is Connie Bouquet. I am a resident of Mequon. Have been appointed co-chair of the Town Center Gateway Committee, and I'm here to just share with you the design that has evolved from all the comments that we received last month from you and from the village board and the Gateway Committee members themselves, pulling together bits and pieces from that were appreciated from the three different concepts that were offered. We want to share with you a 3-minute video that reflects the design that has evolved, and we want to tell you that at this point we have directed Growth Design Group to provide construction estimates for this design before the city, of course, goes through the planning process with it and puts it out for bid. It'll obviously have to go through all of that, but we're hoping that it will move through smoothly. Given the direction from the mayor when he appointed the Gateway Committee, our intent and our goal is to get the Gateway feature under construction, and we'd love to have it finished before the Taste of Mequon. That might be a little ambitious, but we want to try. So we're moving in that direction. So let's take a look at this very brief video. There's no sound. We are coming, as you can see, we're headed west, and to the right we have moved the sidewalk away from the curb and widened it so that when we have kids from the high school and their cross country particularly, we'll have them in a safer area. We're moving around the feature. We have maintained just blocked on the word, the logo, a logo for MT, but we really keep the Mequon Thiensville spelled out. We have slightly moved the event sign and we've raised it for better visibility all around. This circle is a walkway, as you can see. It has a platform where wheelchairs can get up to the platform and overlook the river. There is a recommended staircase down to the river as well, but of course the handicap access to the river is already there in the river walk. When you walk into the design, you're going to see places where there's opportunity for storytelling, areas where we can share the history of Mequon and Thiensville. Hopefully it'll show up in a second here. On the beams, we think that we can be putting some information about the history naturally into the area. This is a wall where donors can be acknowledged. And that will help us not only in the fundraising, but it will be something that will tie people in the community together. We walk around to the platform overlooking the river. We have an opportunity for storyboards that, again, can tell people about the history of this community. The trees are trees that are out there now. We have identified the fact that all but one black walnut, and we have multiple black walnuts out there, but all but one black walnut will be protected and saved in this design. That was important to us as well. So that's pretty much what we see. I think there may be, are there some additional pictures on there?
No, we just loaded the video.
Just the video, okay. Just so you know, the Mequon Thiensville Junior Women's Club is a member, they're participating on the Gateway Committee. So the idea of moving and raising the event board is supported by the Women's Club. They'll want to know precisely where it ultimately goes, but that's where we are right now. We're putting it out for getting the cost of it. We'll be back and give you more information as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Moving on to public officials' reports. Mr. City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just want to bring up a couple of quick reminders regarding some upcoming events here in Mequon and Ozaukee County over the next couple of weeks. First and foremost, Ozaukee County is hosting a clean sweep event this coming Saturday, May 12th, from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. at the Ozaukee County Highway Shop, where they'll be collecting household, agricultural, and hazardous waste, again between the hours of 8 a.m. and 12 p.m., also collecting used tires. More information is available on the Ozaukee County website. Advanced registration is encouraged. And then secondly, it felt like spring today here in Mequon, and that means Memorial Day is just around the corner. I see Legion Post Commander Chuck Friedline here, and the Legion will be again hosting Memorial Day ceremonies, including a parade on Monday, May 28th. The parade will muster at Grace Lutheran Church in Thiensville, where it has for the last several years. The parade will come down Cedarburg Road, and there will be ceremonies here on the front steps of City Hall, likely around 11 a.m. on Memorial Day. Thereafter, the Legion Post will be hosting a lunch, as they've done for the last several years, and I believe, Chuck, the public is invited to attend. So just a reminder, Memorial Day is celebrated here in Mequon with a parade and a remembrance here at City Hall, and then a lunch over at the Legion Post. That's it.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda, which includes council minutes of April, organizational meeting minutes of April, architectural board minutes of March, Board of Appeals minutes of September 2017, festivals committee minutes of March, finance personnel minutes of March 13th, and a special finance committee meeting minutes of February 27th and March 27th. Fire department report for April, joint Mequon, Thiensville Bike and Pedestrian Way Commission minutes of March, Park and Open Space Board minutes of March and April, Planning Commission minutes of March, Public Welfare Committee minutes of March, Public Works Committee minutes of March, Sewer Utility District Commission minutes of March 6th and March 13th. And ordinance 1519, an ordinance amending Chapter 2 of the Mequon Municipal Code regarding the first annual meeting of the city's Board of Review. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Welfare Committee.
Mayor, Public Welfare took up the ordinance 2018-1519 this evening and recommended, and approved it, recommended it to the Common Council, and recommend approval.
Okay.
But point of order, that's on there as a first reading.
It's, I was going to say, that's a first reading, so our action tonight will not actually approve that ordinance. Do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is adopted. We now will convene as a committee of the whole for a discussion of Resolution 3515, which is a resolution amending Resolution 2959 concerning policies that outline the city's financial management practices. This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee in April and tabled by the Common Council in April. Alderman Worth.
Well, in front of everybody, there are two documents, one marked A and one marked B. It's some work I did on A. It's, I don't know that we need to go over A, perhaps. It's largely some correcting a few typing errors. There were two section 15s, you know, just some numeric things and some language change. But the document marked B were some policy or some discussion points I thought the council ought to at least, some of them more significant than others, that we ought to discuss, or send back to finance personnel to discuss, one or the other. And I don't know if I should walk through them or what makes the most sense here. You want me to explain why I raised each one of them, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all new to me.
Under policy statement number 3, the language not less than 10%, which I think is fine, but then historically, there has been some debate over, well, when we get up to 15%, we're still at the policy, and we should never look at reducing the amount of general fund balance. I think our policy should be 10%, and then on an annual basis, we make up our mind whether we are agreeable to carrying more than that, as opposed to having a policy that leaves it more open-ended. I also just think our budget presentation should have a general fund balance history. I would call these two as somewhat less significant. On policy 4, probably 6 or 7 years ago, maybe it's a little longer than that, staff and finance personnel spent a lot of time creating a formula for determining how much fees should be set at, the fees that are supposed to recapture expenses. Somehow that didn't make it into our old finance policy and financial policy, and it's not in this either. And I think that ought to be part of the policy so that there's a guideline for how do you get to having our fees equal what it costs the city to provide the services. I don't know if do we still follow that? Is there an annual calculation using that methodology, or is it some other methodology at this point?
No, it's the same methodology, Alderman. It's basically based on budget, and there's an overhead calculation plus the direct pay of the subject employees that we're charging back.
I'd like to see that in the policy, in part how we calculate the overhead. I mean, I think that's a somewhat significant financial policy if we're going to have a set of comprehensive financial policies. On the next page, there's the investment policy, and I've unfortunately spent a lot of time in the last 5 years arguing over investment policies, I thought overall was pretty good. But what there doesn't seem to be is a check and balance on the Director of Finance, who, by the way, I have faith in the current Director of Finance, but who knows who's gonna hold that position. We vest that person with a lot of authority on investing money without a corresponding, somebody who's overseeing it, or a group that, can override him or something, so that we don't start going down a path that some communities have gone in investing funds in a way that doesn't meet the prudent man standard. We have that in here. Somebody checking, are we operating as a prudent man, or prudent person? It used to be, sorry, this statute used to be prudent man. So that's a policy, I guess I'd like to see, is that there's some sort of a check or balance, and maybe I'm missing something. Is there that in here? I couldn't find it.
Well, one of the things that we've started for 2018 is that the F&P committee receives a report on the investments quarterly, so they'll see the range of investments, what kind of returns we're getting, the quality rating, things like that. I suppose a nefarious finance director could do some gaming of that system and change up the investments before the cutoff date, but as far as a mechanism, I haven't really thought about this a lot since I've received this, but perhaps you could involve the city administrator or the assistant finance director or somebody else to have that comfort that you're looking for.
I mean, I just think that's an area, it's a significant part of what you do, and particularly during the recession, we statewide found an awful lot of organizations that had people who had that kind of authority, who decided they wanted to try to increase the investment return in an unsafe manner and cost their organizations a lot of money. And I just think having some sort of check and balance ought to be there when you're talking about, sizable sums of investment. On the next page, I just would add, unless an exception is made by the Common Council, I agree as a general rule that this is a nice concept, or is the appropriate policy, but that there may be times where you use one-time revenues to support ongoing expenditures, because you just decide we've got a big, this year we're going to use these, we sold a piece of property, and we'd rather give tax relief than we would to spend it in some other manner. I think that's a decision for the council to make. I guess all of this is something we could waiver on. The long-term financial planning section sounds very nice, but when government does this, staff is going to be conservative in the way they make their projections. In every instance, you will show a deficit going forward, because that's what happens when government does long-term projections, and because your expenses are always going up, and you'll project annual tax increases, and I don't know that has any, until you actually get to that 4 years out and look at that. We've always had projected tax increases, haven't always had to make those. Maybe some people argue maybe we should have at times increased taxes, but you will always project out that you need tax increases if you do long-term financial planning the way government does long-term financial planning. So I wonder if that's a useful process, because we typically aren't going to increase taxes. There may be
So
times
what do
we
you think
should.
is the alternative to long-term financial planning and projections, though?
The reality is, you do this planning, but government, I think long-term, what you need to spend money on makes sense. I mean, what are the things that need to be fixed in future years? Projecting revenues going forward isn't a useful process. because you're not gonna know what the revenues are, you're not gonna know it's all guessing anyhow. You're not going to know what the financial markets are gonna be doing 3 years from now. You're not gonna be know how much construction you're going to have. Planning what you need to spend money on and prioritizing makes sense on a long-term basis. Projecting out revenues doesn't, you can project revenues for next year. I think projecting revenues beyond that is a pure guessing game anyhow. And I don't know what benefit there is. What is the benefit?
I think the benefit would be if you recognize an issue, you start to think about what you would do if that issue were to come. You make plans, but they never get implemented the way they're made. But what they do is they make you think about the various alternatives.
Oh, and I agree, that's on the expenditure side though, isn't it?
Well, same as could be on the revenue side. You're projecting how much revenue you get, and you go, oh, geez, we've got way too much, or we've got way too little, or we're projecting it wrong, or
Always
it's
going
an
to project.
exercise in anticipating what might happen and being prepared for it. It's not that you're saying this is what's going to happen. It's for your benefit to be prepared.
I don't feel real strongly about this one, but I will tell you, we'll always project structural deficits. Always. Government always projects structural deficits. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're not, but usually they just end up being a battering ram that somebody uses to either criticize or to push for early tax increases even when they're not necessary.
Can I just say, though, Alderman, that apparently that battering ram has not been very effective in Mequon, so I guess you don't have to worry about that very much. I would say that I think we would all acknowledge that long-term projections are fallible and probably not very precise, but I do think they have a benefit in at least attempting to look forward to see what the likelihood is in terms of expenditures and payouts. It doesn't mean we're tied to that and that we're going to increase taxes 2 years early because, we're looking down the road, we see that there may be trouble coming. I don't see it that way at all. But I think it's I don't think it's not valuable.
Okay. Have we been doing this?
No, we have not.
I
We've been doing it on the capital side, but not the pure financial forecasting that you're talking about, Alderman Worth.
So we're going to add work for staff, and is there a problem that we currently have that somebody thinks needs to be rectified by doing this? I find when the state and the federal government, particularly the state government, there's always a structural deficit, and yet when you actually get to the actual budget, there isn't one. And I think it's more of a political football than it is a worthwhile planning exercise. I think expenditures, it's a plan, particularly capital expenditures, it's a worthwhile planning exercise. I think the rest is just a lot of work for staff that doesn't mean much. But if people want it, I'm not dead set against it. I just think it looks like government work.
I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think having, projected costs, is very important for us, and projected needs is very important. I'd hate to see us basing decisions on projected revenue or the lack thereof. Going forward, I think that's not a good situation when we would base some decisions on that. Who knows what's going to happen 2 years from now? And if we base the decision on this year, 3 years from now we may get these revenues, we'll have that so we can cover this. It's not the way to do it, because that stuff changes continually. If we were basing decisions back in 2007 on a rosy picture and 2008, 2009 rolled around, that wasn't being making good decisions at that time. So I agree with the fact of having the long-term costs and analysis done. future planning on revenues. As a matter of fact, I mean, future planning on revenues, we don't do it and don't exercise that a lot, but I mean, we control a majority of the future revenues. I mean, with taxes. We haven't exercised that right and haven't done that. We've held the taxes down a little, but we really dictate basically what the majority of our revenues are going to be when it comes to on a yearly basis. So there are some other things that come into consideration and what the state gives you and stuff that nature and for the roads and that, but basically we do have the right to set that future revenue, so I don't know if that long-term planning for that is really accurate then.
Well, I would just jump in and add, and I know you've got some other comments to walk through here, Alderman Worth. It may make sense for staff to absorb what you've shared with us here today and huddle up and see if we cannot address some of these points in a version that could then be brought back for adoption next month, assuming that's the will of the council here this evening.
Just one thing to step back just real quick, and we went over the 10%. I didn't bring this up, and I think it's inside there that the city administrator or our treasurer brings forward a yearly report on that. I think it states inside there that it should be a yearly report on how that 10% is, or how our fund is, where it is at. I mean, shouldn't we have that done a little bit more time during the year, maybe at least twice during the year, to find out how that is, instead of right at budget time, and find out how that's been performing?
Well, Director Watson indicated that we're now bringing forth quarterly investment reports to the Finance and Personnel Committee. We started
Just state
that process.
inside here in the policy, it says yearly, we get a yearly
Sure.
report in it, and then that should be changed inside this policy then to reflect
Where I
what we're
was
actually doing.
going is, we also have a quarterly financial report, a budget report, which shows the current status of expenditures and revenues. And I think that report, Director Watson, if I'm not mistaken, shows or gives a snapshot of our fund balance in the general fund on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, it does, and plus we'll be bringing the CAFR to the council roughly early spring of each year. You'd get the final numbers for the previous fiscal year as part of the audit. So we'd have a continuing dialogue going on with fund balance throughout the year.
Well, my only question was that if we're doing that, great. I mean, but it states inside of here there should be a yearly one, and then probably our policy should reflect what we're currently doing.
You talking about the general fund balance?
Yeah,
You talking about
general fund
investment?
balance. General fund balance.
Okay.
You know, so they have a yearly report on it, and
I hear
if we're
what you're
doing
saying.
more than that, then
We
our
can do
policy
that.
should reflect what we're doing.
4 of my next 5 comments are all related to, it seems to be a policy change where things in this policy say that it's going to go to finance personnel for approval, various approvals of contracts and purchases and services, where historically that's been done by the standing committee. You know, the Public Works will review contracts that relate to roads and that type of thing, and safety will review the purchase of ambulances or consultants hired for the police and fire department. In this policy, it appears that in every instance, it's going to the Finance and Personnel Committee, and I've marked four spots for that. So I guess I'd at least ask you to consider. I'm not on any one of those 3 boards, and probably nothing will go to public welfare, so this isn't my own personal interest, but I think that you know, the safety committee ought to be addressing safety issues, welfare, and finance personnel. You know, the items that, I mean, public works issues. This seems to send everything to finance personnel.
It says and/or applicable board, commission, or committee.
Boards, commissions, and committees, at least the way we've used that as a council, are things like the park board, you know, we call those standing committees, not committees, and that's one ambiguity in both the way people draft and our ordinances. But boards, commissions, and committees are usually those outside things, not our standing committees. Or it ought to be clear that it's the appropriate standing committee.
Well, and it only says it in the first case. If you go to the subsequent references, it just says finance and personnel. without additional committees, so.
I'm assuming we're not changing it, that finance personnel is going to review bidding on every public works contract.
Can you just say the appropriate committee?
Yeah, something. I mean, I'm just suggesting we fix it. I didn't fix it.
Is the intent not to be a catch-all? If it doesn't go through one of the other committees, it has to go through F&P?
Well, yeah, I think that would make sense. If
Well, it has to go through
Flip
the
it
common
around.
council. And
Right.
before it comes to the council, it has to go through some committee.
Correct, but I think if you just flip the statement around, and it's got to go through one of the other committees, but if it doesn't belong to one of the other committees, it has to go through F&P.
Okay.
I think it's just,
The committee of last resort.
people understand the intent is just the wording leaves room for ambiguity, and we abhor ambiguity.
Okay.
I think the guidelines for approval, both for purchases and for service contracts, is that what our current process is, or is this a change?
That's what our current practice is.
Okay. And I think here there's some confusion. Often we will approve things in the budget, and with the understanding that it'll end up coming back to the council for approval. We're here, you know, anything under $25,000, I think is what it says, doesn't necessarily come back to the council, and that might be okay, but I hope people understand that both at budget time and also in reading this. That if there's a line item in the budget for $24,999, we've approved that expenditure, not just budgeted for it, the way this is written. At least on services, you know, as far as consultants and what have you, I would think we might want to consider whether we want to have some greater control of that. On the flip side, might we want to consider an emergency exception for both goods and services? And I'm talking about a true emergency, a school shooting, I remember several years ago when there was actually a member of the public who died in a squad car. And I do know the city administrator and the mayor at the time hired a PR firm. Not something I normally would recommend, but I think under those extreme circumstances, it probably helped to give a consistent message. And I don't know whether that would be allowed under this policy as adopted. So in an emergency situation, might the mayor and the city administrator, or the mayor, city administrator, and the, you know, council president, or the president of some committee, finance, chair of some committee, have the ability on a short-term basis to approve an expenditure that's necessary for the general good, as long as it comes back to council as soon as you can. Just a thought. And on the credit card use, oh, wait a minute. On the next page, I have prior to signing any service contract, regardless, this says the mayor will sign contracts on behalf of the city if they
page are you
meet
on?
this policy. Page 24 on the bottom, or packet page 151. I would think that we ought to, if the mayor wants to refer a committee back, a contract, this says he will sign it. He ought to have the ability to send it to a committee if he wants to, for review and approval. On the credit card use thing, and that's actually what the first one that caught my eye and why I wanted to go through this more carefully. There's nothing in here that talks about who can be a card holder. There's no policy, whatever. I don't know, is that department heads? Is that every employee in the city can be a card holder? I don't know what the policy is, but it doesn't say here. Who has credit cards?
It's primarily department heads or supervisors such as the fleet manager, deputy directors. We have about 13 cardholders in the city.
I would think even if it's, you can only be a card holder if approved by the city administrator, something about who can, there should be some control over who can hold a card.
The policy stated as right now is it's subject to the approval of a department head.
Where does it say that?
Number 8.
Oh, issuance of additional cards, but I don't know who the current cards are. That,
We can clarify that.
okay.
Not a problem.
My next question on the next page is, we require employees to get a collision damage waiver to pay for that extra insurance. Have we checked with our insurance company to see if it's covered? I mean, seems to me always to be kind of a scam with the car rental companies selling that. I wouldn't,
I thought so too, but I got that exact language from our liability carrier. So they recommend that we do as published here.
from our insurance company, did you
Yes,
say?
sir.
Okay. Just because they don't want to pay for it.
So what is the cost for them to cover that on our policy?
Pardon?
What is the cost for them to cover that on our policy? Do they have a rider for that for us instead of being at the mercy of the car rental companies?
Well, it has to do with who assumes the risk if something should happen to that vehicle while it's rented, and this gives the city extra protection if we have that waiver. So therefore, it's been about 6 months since I had this conversation with our agent, but the bottom line was he recommended that we include that verbiage in our policy, in our practice.
But they don't have coverage?
But I think what they're saying is that that might be to the advantage of our insurance company to recommend that we purchased a separate waiver for this, because then they are not liable to cover us.
We can provide the language of the justification for that in the future.
Okay.
Alderman Worth, I'm not aware of any instances where I've approved the rental of a car by a city employee during my
Okay.
tenure. Director Watson, these are rare occurrences, if ever, correct?
Correct.
I was kind of wondering about the whole policy on elected officials, why we even have it, because have we ever had elected official, I didn't even put that one in here, but have we ever had an elected official trip authorized by the city?
Not recently, no.
Still wishing for one.
But, and if we ever did, it has to go to the council, and at the time, we'd probably put whatever restrictions on we wanted to put on it.
Well, policies are set up so whether they're rare or they're routinely used, it should be inside of here. What
True, we want to have rules of the road, exactly.
I'm comfortable not being a bandit.
I didn't, the receipt for donated goods form, is that this thing on the back? I mean, it's a different title, so that's more of a language correction. The final sentence on page 162 seems to either be redundant, or I'm not sure what it's, because not all donations are subject to the approval of the common council. Up above it says only those over $5,000, I think. So I'm not quite sure I follow that final sentence. And then on the form, it says check where appropriate, but there's no check boxes. The whole please respect my privacy, I don't want to be recognized for my contribution. It's nice, but donations to the city are subject to, well, I have a typo, open records requests. We ought to be careful that we're not implying that somehow people can keep their donation secret, because the only way to do that, and you can donate to the Mequon Community Foundation and earmark it for a city project instead of donating to the city in the first place. And that isn't subject to an open records request. But if they're donating directly, it isn't private or confidential. And what is the signature line for the common council? Is that the mayor? Is that the I mean, the form seems to need some work.
These are all good questions, and in conferring with the city attorney, he has not reviewed this form, so I would suggest that maybe he take a look at some of the concerns that you're raising here, Alderman Worth, and we get this buttoned up so that
Right.
we have the proper disclosures.
By the way, I had a lot of questions and concerns, but I think it's a really good stab at, and I appreciate the work that was done, but I did have some concerns.
So, given the rather fresh nature of the comments shared by Alderman Worth here this evening, I would suggest that staff would be happy to go back and take a couple of weeks to review these comments and to come up with some alternative language to address the concerns discussed here tonight. We've got some other little things we can clean up in that process as well. And then I would propose that we come back at our meeting in June and hopefully approve a clean document that captures the comments discussed here tonight and all of the other work that was done leading up till tonight's discussion.
Alderman Durbin?
One quick question on policy statement 3 with the reserve requirements. Did anyone ever contemplate specifying a maximum that we can hold in the unallocated reserve fund or general fund? At what point would we have to give it back to the taxpayer? We have a minimum now, but we've specified no maximum. Has that come up in any of the discussions?
Well, it used to say a
10 to
maximum of 15%, but we were well over 15%, and we didn't, and we left it there. So I guess you could say we weren't following the policy.
As we're authoring a policy, if that's something we want, we should contemplate what that level is. Just because we didn't follow it in the past doesn't mean we have to not write it down. And then we're not accountable for not following what we didn't write down.
Well, that's why I made the change I did to set it. We maintain a 10% undesignated reserve. Or if we want to debate that number to make it a different number, we should.
But you could choose to carry more on a year-over-year basis. Couldn't you?
And we have.
And we have.
Yeah,
At some point, it's got to be enough. Like I've seen
100%.
Well, I've seen some communities go very, very high, and for some reason they still keep on borrowing for projects. And think about a community I used to live in. At some point, it just doesn't make sense to have it around. It's good to have some around, which is why we have the policy for the minimum.
Well, for
It gives you a control
purposes-
band to operate in, where you're not
I know.
always zeroing it out all the time because you have to.
I know Director Watson's had more historical experience with this than I have here with the city, but in terms of setting a target, that's really a budgeting exercise, because when you put your budget together, you're setting a target for what your fund balance will be as of January 1st of the new budget or fiscal year. Over the course of that fiscal year, after January 1st, the fund balance is going to ebb and flow based on revenues, based on expenditures, and based on cash flow. And from an operating budget perspective, it makes more sense to have a range, potentially, say in this instance 10 to 12% or 10 to 15%, because if you set a target and all of a sudden you have 12% or 15% fund balance as of June 1st, you don't necessarily want to draw down that fund balance because your target is 10 or your policy is 10, because based on revenues and based on expenditures, there are lags during the course of the fiscal year, and it may be artificially high for a period of time and then resort to the norm, which has otherwise been budgeted as of January 1st. So from an operating standpoint, more flexibility is suggested and recommended, but from a budgeting standpoint, perfectly comfortable with a target. But a range can also be a target as well.
Well, it makes sense that from an operating standpoint, maybe you don't even have it in your policy because it's, but I think at least on an annual budgetary basis, we ought to have some sort of a consensus. One, it keeps us from having an annual fight that doesn't make it, I mean, we still can because this is just a policy and it doesn't bind us. But it's, used to get thrown back in our face, well, we haven't reached 15% yet. Well, the the concept wasn't we were going to try to get to 15%. In fact, there was a period of time where we had about 3%, and still had really good bond ratings, by the way. So I just think it would be on an annualized basis or a budget time basis, a 10% number is better than Mequon has historically done, but not better than its short-term recent history. And at least indicates a place we want to try to be. So we could change the language a little bit to make it as on an annual basis, 10%.
And we at the staff level might need a little time to finesse that. But we would be happy to do that.
Okay. Alderman Strasser.
I'd just like to address the fact that Alderman Worth did a really great job going through a lot of the language. He's got kind of an A and a B version of edits here, and as somebody on finance and personnel, I've quickly briefed version A, and I see we haven't discussed it, and I don't really see a need to. The edits look like they're just mainly grammatical, maybe a couple wording issues that we maybe had in committee that were just actually fine-tuned in this. And then a lot of the things in B, they're all good points and they're all good for review, and it seems like we're going to go through this exercise one more time. So, I would recommend that it does go through, we're sure that it goes through finance and personnel one more time before coming to council, for a final recommendation. And I'd invite the other aldermen to sit in on this. I know you've got other meetings, or we could actually schedule a separate meeting when maybe we could have some consensus, or go through it a little bit further at that point. We've got a couple other meetings that we're getting consensus on if we're available for. Maybe we could group this with it as well and just kind of nail this down. I mean, it's important that the entire council is reflected in this policy. It's not just the finance and personnel. And we'll just make sure that we get a chance to vet through the issues.
Okay. Well, with that direction, I think we're on track to get this hopefully buttoned up before we head into substantive budget discussions later this year.
Sure. Great.
Alderman Meyer.
Going back to the 10% of the fund, I agree with Alderman Urban that we should have some kind of maximum on it, that then we're forced to return that money back, which is the residents' money, back to the residents, and we just don't keep building up the fund. And maybe we can get staff to have some kind of recommendation of what they feel would be a comfortable percentage on that. But I do, and if Common Council is not comfortable with that number, then we can change that. But I do feel that if we, and it's just an arbitrary number, if at budget time it comes up, we're at 13%, and we set a number of 12%, that percentage goes back into the back to the residents in the form of reducing down that budget for that year. But then at the discretion of the Common Council, if we want to drop that down to the 10% at that time, we still have that discretion to do that. But should be a mandatory level where we do that.
At least give staff some guidance in preparing the budget too.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the second item.
Let's go parking.
Presentation of concept designs for the Mequon City Hall public parking lot within the Civic Campus.
Good evening. My name is Tom Olenichek. I'm with Harwood Engineering Consultants, working with...
You want to pull up the mic to you?
Sure.
Thank you.
Maybe I could talk louder as well. Tom Olenichek, Harwood Engineering, working with city staff and groups on the Civic Center parking lot redevelopment. We're here before you tonight, or I'm here before you. My team is not here with me, it's just myself. We're here tonight to basically present, it's very similar to the Gateway project that we just watched a video for, which was very cool. We're here to present some conceptual ideas, so we're a little bit a little bit before where the Gateway project is at. We're in the early stages. And we want to present some concepts overall and get some feedback. Our main priority here tonight is to gauge reaction to the different concepts, find out what's important, and move forward with the final design. So a little outline, I've touched on a little bit of this already. Our goals for the overall project are shown here on the screen and in some of the packet material. Overall, we're looking for a number somewhere in the realm of 178 plus or minus spaces. That number comes from a previous study that was completed and by a traffic study professional. We also know we want to incorporate green infrastructure. We have a ability to utilize an MMSD funding piece that goes along with this. So with that, we're going to look at how that can be blended into the design. Also, very important is the pedestrian pieces and the bike connections to some of the adjacent uses here from some of the other uses that are nearby. Again, we're looking to gain guidance tonight for which concept or which pieces of concept are important or valuable. We'll talk a little bit about the process, about where we're at right now as far as the design and some of the pieces we're looking at. We'll look at some imagery and some examples of previous projects and gauge reaction on some of that. And then again, we'll finally look at the concepts and go through those. And I guess I'd like to say at any time during this presentation, or I'd like to call it a discussion, if there are comments, questions, concerns, you can voice them at any time and we can address it at that point. So this is the overall area that we're talking about right now when we're talking about the Civic Center parking lot redevelopment. This is the area, essentially encompasses from Cedarburg Road to the Ozaki Trail System and almost down to Mequon Road. City Hall, you can see, is there on the northeast, baseball field to the north. There's approximately 136 existing spaces that are out there right now with an existing building and a configuration that essentially runs north-south. A little bit about where we're at right now as far as the data collection and some of the process. We've received a survey for the overall property. We're able to determine where the existing utilities are, where the grades are, some of those pieces. We've been working with staff and the surveyor to create a very accurate map. I put some buildings on there just to basically depict where those locations are at. We've also done some soil borings out there, finding out what kind of materials and what kind of conditions we're going to be looking at. In general, right now, we've got a preliminary result back from the geotech engineer. And it really varies from around the site, but in general, there's a sand, there's a clay and gravel type of material. There is some perched water that we're seeing as well. So a little bit about where we're at as far as the data collection and that piece. Moving on to something a little more.
What does perched water mean?
Perched water, I was just going to say we're moving on to something more exciting, but I'll go back to this. Perched water is essentially, it means that while they're drilling, they found water. You can see a little triangle up on that chart on the left-hand side. It shows it at about 4 feet or so, and after drilling, the water table was down beyond that, like 10 plus feet. So it means there was some type of water that was stuck at some layer for some reason, and then after drilling, it was found at a lower level. So those are the types of things that we're going to look at when we start talking about different design concepts and different stormwater management features. Those water tables and the pavement design, it becomes important to look at where that water's at and how it gets incorporated into the design. We also did, I should have mentioned, we're involved with the Mequon Town Center development, the redevelopment there, as well as the recent library biofiltration project that was completed with MMST as well. So what we're showing here is a couple slides of examples and imagery. Some of these are our projects, some of these are not. They're examples of pieces that are around the area and just ideas for pieces that we might want to look at, whether it's related to traffic calming. It could be painted symbols on pavement or something a little bit more elaborate like the paver concepts that are shown in some of these pieces here. This is one we did at Wisconsin Club where the user drives over it. You feel, there's an elevation change, those types of things that allow for a traffic calming to occur. The one in the lower left is the Mequon Town Center piece that's immediately adjacent to this development. That was a design we did that incorporates actually stormwater management within it as well. So just some ideas on what these pieces look like. It's not to say that they're going to be used, it's just some ideas for pieces that we're looking at here. A little bit of greenery, some different ideas for biofiltration, what is essentially a stormwater management option that we look at for creating or taking away some of the runoff from the parking lot. Again, some of the funds that are being used or planned to be used for this proposed redevelopment are utilizing MMSD green infrastructure funding. With that being said, obviously we need to be doing something that utilizes that. These are features that are in line with that funding source. So biofiltration, different pieces here for stormwater management, again pavers and different types of green space and hardscape in the area. Some different amenities on the site as well as it relates to bike and signage, showing just some different ideas for how bikes and pieces can be stored, tied up, trailhead signage for the Ozaki signage trail system that's adjacent to this, as well as some mature trees and the shading aspects that can go along with that. So into the concepts actually. We've got, like I mentioned, we've got 4 concepts that we're looking at here. Really, and I'll note the differences on them. The summary up on top really relates to what the major differences are between the different concepts. The main piece with this one is really this is the parking maximized. This is an east-west orientation versus the north-south, which is what it is today. I think it's north-south because of obviously the existing building that's out there and a little bit of the grade change that's there. Anytime we can reorientate the parking or orientate it in the longest direction is the most efficient parking scenario. So when we look at this, there's a large expanse here from east to west. In addition, a lot of the points that we're trying to get to, whether it's the Mequon Town Center piece, the Legion, City Hall, we're sort of walking in that east-west orientation or up to the pool and the baseball area or to the trail system. They're all sort of in that orientation. There's not really a heavy use to climb up this hill and get into the cemetery or scale a fence and get into this area. So with all the concepts you're going to see, they do run east-west. That was something that we looked at in order just to maximize the parking in this area, if you're curious about that. So with that being said,
Are these 8 or 9 or 10-foot stalls?
these are currently shown as 9.
9.
Yeah, they're 9 by 18, I believe.
Can you do me a favor on each one of these iterations? Can you point out the connectivity to
You bet.
Spur 16 across the railroad tracks, because we're talking about having a crossing there, and then thoroughly go over the access, the bike access from the interurban trail to the pool or town center?
Sure.
That is something that's really important to have on this piece, because as people are driving, like with this version, I think people will drive angularly through the parking lot to cut short to go to collect TiVo for a coffee in the morning. But they'd have easy access and direct access to the pool. And
Correct.
we need to address both, because kids and families are going to be going to the pool, but they're also going to be maybe cutting over and going to, Town Center 1
Sure.
as well. So.
Okay, that's fair. So on this one, like you had said, basically the access point is here on the trail system. Spur 16 is across the tracks over there. Basically, on this piece, we did talk a little bit. We were working with city staff a little bit, and we acknowledged that there's probably a little bit of, it's a little bit faded here, but this is the access up to the Mequon MTC1, Mequon Town Center here. This orientation is a bit, it could be cleaned up a little bit, I'll say. So this access piece could be straightened out a little bit to clarify that and not have too much confusion. The last thing we want to do here is introduce confusion. We're trying to create simplicity, ease of parking. We do have an optional cut through here in the event that this is deemed too far as people are driving through here, or there are movements and people want to get out after a baseball game. This cut through allows for a little bit quicker release out of this area here. You can see the ADA parking adjacent to the building and a little pocketed green space here with access still through to the pool for deliveries and service, those types of things. So this one really is our maximized parking option, 212 plus or minus. I say plus or minus because in all options we don't want to get pinned to it. There are variances as we get into the actual design for power poles or grading nuances or whatever it is. So I'd like to leave the plus or minus after it. Concept 2 is incorporating a little bit more green space. The parking count went down a little bit, obviously. We've introduced a center landscape aisle that goes through here, provides a little bit more shading opportunity. We have a cut through here for the sidewalks. The bike trail connection to the Ozaki piece here can also connect up here and allow users to basically connect through to Mequon Town Center on this side as well as on this side. And then we've got some crosswalk pieces here that would also allow for users to get through there. We do have on this option, we've got what we call a special parking area. It's really just an immediate piece that's adjacent to the building. This could be used for city events, senior parking, different pieces. Maybe it's a voting scenario, as well as ADA parking that would be flanking the existing building as well. And then again, a service connection that would allow, this would be noted or not gated per se, but it would be shown so that it's not obvious that you're going to want to drive back there. We noted traffic calming here. That really relates to the crossings that come through there. Again, those could be elevated pieces. They could be striped, painted, something to that effect. We also note that with this scenario, you'll see another scenario on the next option that allows for a dedicated drive-through with no parking on it. Sometimes there's concerns for parking movements along a throughway as you're driving through here. I would acknowledge that, but I would say this isn't a regional hospital, this isn't a mall. The traffic movements that are going to be happening here actually would serve as a traffic calming measure. You wouldn't typically be driving as fast as you would if there was no parking on it. So it's something to consider and gauge comfort on that particular aspect. And I can flip
Do
back
any of
to
these things do anything with elevations?
which things?
Any of your drawings? I mean, I'm assuming it's not raising it up to the level of Town Center 1.
Correct.
But between the city and the parking lot right now, there's a pretty tremendous grade
Right.
variation there.
Yeah,
also.
I'm coming down here, this is probably about 4 or 5 feet, and then the grade change from the existing parking area up here by the building down to this existing lot is actually about 4 or 5 feet as well. So we feel that that could be blended out across here and push that grade. It's not as significant as I had, visually as what I thought it was. So I think we can make up that grade change there. We can also enhance islands or lose a little bit of grade, as we say, across these areas with these islands here. It can get a little steeper in this area or somewhere in this realm. So there will be some grade change in that area. Essentially, everything here, this whole area flows down to here. This is about the lowest area, and then it heads north. Concept 3 is the difference
Parking
here.
spaces. Grab what you want. Yeah. Nope, no striping.
It's a free striping scenario. It's no, I just didn't show the striping on this particular one, but there are about 168, 170 spaces in this scenario. The main difference in this piece is the dedicated drive-through here. There's no parking along this. There is a sidewalk connection here, or a pathway connection to the trail, as well as a trail connection on the north side. The main difference, again, is the connection through here. This allows for a dedicated throughway, and there would be probably some calming measures here, crosswalks. Maybe these are elevated a little bit so that they almost act as a speed bump, if you will, if this was a concern. This option still has the special parking area over here, which could be used for different alternatives. One of the other things we incorporated on this one was a plaza or walkway piece that connected through here, sort of a bit of a entranceway into the pool, baseball, library path up to the north, in addition to an existing service drive as well. And then the last concept is a blend really of concept 2, and taking into consideration basically the main difference on this one is we got rid of the special parking area over here, and turned it into more of a overall plaza, gateway piece, a little bit more of a community feature where there could be amenities that are along this pathway. It could be pavers. It could be sort of an interesting piece that really invites people up to the north. You know, there could be benches. It could be a break space. So that was the logic on that part of it. This one comes at a count of about 176 spaces, plus or minus. We have the connections to the trail system on the south side here that would bring people to Mequon Town Center 1, as well as on the north side. Some potential bike stations. I mean, honestly, these pieces could be put into almost any option. We're showing them on certain ones just as ideas of where there could be bike stations or bike parking, different alternatives here. And all of them have dedicated ADA parking as close as we can to the building. So with the 4 options, really, and I can flip back to any of these, really, our next steps here is we really like to hear some feedback on pieces that are important to the city, pieces that we're looking for, and then what we're going to do is take this feedback and actually utilize it to create actual construction documents, work with the city to make sure that it adheres to the codes, and then bring back a finalized design and move forward with it. It's got a rather tight schedule as far as the bidding and award and project completion. So it's important that we can share this with you and get any input we can as soon as we can.
Alderman Bushy.
Thank you for the presentation. Good information. My comments are quick, and it refers to Concept 1, which I like for a number of reasons. One is it was previously mentioned some time ago about having parking spots along City Hall so that people who are coming in to do business don't have to deal with crossing what's a thoroughfare there. So I like the maximum spaces that you had along there. Second was also, this does maximize parking, which given the previous or the earlier presentation with the gateway, that can provide extra parking for there. And then there's an option here I just hate to say, but we just got past snow season, and not to bring that up again, but it looked like option 1 probably had the best option for people who have to do snow plowing to make that as quickly completed as possible. And then obviously the last point in there is that it had the single dollar sign compared to the other ones. So that I thought was a major advantage. Thanks.
Alderman Strelchak.
Well, I'll agree and disagree all at once. The plowing, my experience is that when people plow and they've got a large parking lot, they need a place to put the snow. So in your analysis, which version actually does have the best snow drop areas based on the current design? I mean, we're looking at sticking, X amount of widgets in a small space. A, we want it to be aesthetically pleasing, but B, we don't want 20 stalls allocated to snow pile in winter, and so on and so forth. Do you have feedback on?
We have looked at it a little bit. I mean, quite honestly, Concept 1 doesn't have as much green space, so logically that would be one where there would be available space for the snow. Snow can be stored in some of the green space islands for some of the other options, however.
Yeah, that's where I thought you were maybe going with that.
Concept 2 and some of the others is a little bit narrower, so we've got some room actually on the south side, although a bit. This is actually, if you can follow this line here, this is about the line of where the existing drive is right now. So there's room there to push beyond the walk pile snow. There are snow storage areas that are available, but in all honesty, and for that matter, I mean, pieces could be pushed to the north as well. There's a lot of room up there once that building comes down. That may be a very logical place to put almost all of the snow. So I would hate to have the design totally dictated personally from a snow storage perspective. And we design a ton of parking lots and developments, and we hear it from facility people all the time. So I'm not brushing that aside. it's a piece that's very important from a maintenance and a timing aspect. But I think there are solutions on this site where there are areas where we're not in a confined space. I think we can push snow somewhere or push it off.
Okay, now that I'm past the snow question, just kind of my feedback. I like the versions with the 2 walks. The reason is I really like the access to the pool being separate, and I really like the access, you know, as people park in these parking spots. When we did the parking study, there was the 800-foot range, and then the distance people were willing to walk. Unfortunately, those are green space islands in this, and I don't know that there's a way to get around that. But if we have good parking nearby there with a sidewalk for people to get out of the walkway with their kids as they're going into Town Center 1, and then you know, our vision for this is to have a walkable community in the Town Center area. So as people are coming from Spur 16 to go to Town Center 1 or City Hall or to a festival or to the pool or to the ball field and things like that, they've got safe passage for walking. They're not walking down aisles in parking lots. I mean, it's far from ideal. It's cumbersome, and it's a little bit of a safety issue.
Correct.
So addressing, you know, the 800-foot kind of radius around Town Center 1 to make sure we maximize that parking in the area is a key component that I would want to see. I'd want to see the effective walkways coming from, and I'd actually like to know where that crossing on the railroad track is suggested that it might go. So the south access to the north access to the trail is where that would be? Okay, good. So we're at least directly across from that and not jogging, because people just cut that corner anyway.
Right.
I think it's the safest. I think, you know, as you're at 183 spots versus 212, I think you're really close. You know, again, we want to maximize it. But, and I also like this version because you've got a lot of parking that's just kind of around City Hall.
Right.
And we've preserved some of that for the access for, you know, people to use their city the way they need to use it, get in for permits or do whatever they need to do.
Okay, thank you.
I like concept 2. What I actually hate is straight-in parking. That is just the worst to try to get into. That is takes the most amount of time for somebody to do that. You have more accidents when you have that, people backing into other people's bumpers, and that. Angled parking is the easy, best way to do that. Now, you may lose a couple of spaces because of that, but I think adjusting some of the islands or the ends inside of that would adjust to that. But angle parking is just the easiest to do, and it is just a hard concept also for me to try to figure out, if you don't have the angle parking, how are you going to have the traffic flows? Because if you have the angle parking, you can designate the traffic flows around the area so that people can follow that. This way, unless you're having great big gigantic arrows on the concrete or wherever you're putting down over there for it, you're going to have people coming in from all different angles and trying to get into those parking areas. But if they have it designated as an angle parking inside of it, the concept's pretty simple for people to follow, and it's a lot easier for parking in and out.
It is, and I won't disagree with you on the ease of angled parking. Our development that we designed downtown, that particular large metropolitan city required that we did reversed angled back-end parking, which was a stretch for a lot of people to grasp. We're not proposing that here, and I understand your concerns for the ease of parking for sure. One of the pieces that I stress on lots where we don't have the flexibility to do what we call 90-degree or straight-in parking. This is the most efficient as far as how much parking we can get. As you acknowledged, you know, I lose a few spaces on the angled side. One of the pieces with the angled is that it really it does guide you as you park because it forces you to drive a certain direction. It also creates a path of users that are trying to get through this thing, and if there's a baseball game, and I've been in events or some soccer tournaments or whatever it is, and you're waiting, trying to get somebody to back out, if you're angled, it's a very, it's a much more regimented parking piece. So we do it in scenarios where it's really dictated by the width of the bay that's available. And I can point to a specific example for a project that we looked at redoing in the city of Brookfield. Actually, it was for another town center. They redid their lot because they had it done all as angled, thinking that that was the scenario that was going to be the best case. A new developer bought it and then reworked a proposal to basically create a little bit less confusing lot because it was so circular that you had to get through there. So I understand your concerns. I acknowledge them. And I guess if it's a strong opinion, you know, we'll certainly look to that and look at that. This option, I think, would be the most flexible. You could park from both directions, and it alleviates a backup of people coming and going.
Well, all I see is people when they're trying to get into straight-in parking, they're just going back and forth, trying to get in. And the people behind are just waiting and waiting and waiting, and I can just foresee the fact of people getting out of the ballpark or getting out of a festival area, whatever is happening, and just sitting there and waiting for that person to get out and then the next person to get out. And I mean, if once it's done, the festival or whatever it is, I mean, that's just going to be a huge traffic jam of people trying to get out if you don't have angled parking, because it's just the best way to do it.
As a pickup truck owner, I mean, you're driving on the right, you gotta swerve over to, oh, sorry, you gotta swerve over to hit Alderman Bushy in the head, you know. See, you already have an accident, I'm even just talking about it. You gotta go all the way over into oncoming traffic to even swing in at a straight angle, otherwise you are jogging back and forth, and I don't have a huge truck either. I mean, it's hard, you know. Collectivo, I've got to pull forward and back in to go for coffee in the morning, or really swing wide if there's no one in the lot, but I park at City Hall. I don't even bother with it during the day.
You know, one of the pieces that could address that, and specifically with this concept, we've got a little bit of space. We've got a little bit of space available that those drive aisles could potentially be widened out to maybe alleviate a little bit of your concern and help with the parking piece if this option, you know, if a straight-in parking piece was looked at. So that is an option to maybe ease that up a bit. You have a little bit more room, a little more flexibility as people are pulling out of there. That's an option, I think, in some of these scenarios.
I guess, is there a reason why we're not looking at the angled parking? I'm talking to city staff or something. Is there a reason why we're not looking at it?
What?
Yes, many. The part of the issue with angled parking is directly related to traffic control. Then you may note in City Hall here, you have two directions that are only one way. So you have to, if you go into the first bay of parking, you have to weave all the way through to be able to get back. You don't have the option of parking, so it really limits it to one-way traffic. In fact, if you are all set on angled parking, I would really only consider it for concept 3, where there is the dedicated aisle then to the south, so that you can have better flow through there, because otherwise no one is going to be able to maneuver regularly to get through to the site if they're not trying to otherwise park, because you'd have to dictate the direction of traffic.
Well, are we trying to eliminate people cutting through that area? I think we would be. I mean, we would want to just have people that are being designated to go there to one of the venues that are there, not having people cutting through from Green Bay to trying to circumvent the stoplight or something, or whatever, on the corner. I mean, having a road going straight through that wouldn't do that. It would have more people direct driving through.
Well, I don't necessarily see that people are going to try and avoid the light by going completely through.
No, they do that now. I mean, the people cut through
site.
And go through now, so.
Well, I'm not sure we see that a whole lot. I mean, you're not avoiding any time by doing that, so people would be better served going through the stoplight. But even under that circumstance, yes, of course, a portion of the intent for the plan is traffic calming by some means, but we're also trying to minimize conflict. And when people get confused because they're navigating a parking lot and they're not able to park where they want to, they choose evasive maneuvers. They don't calmly drive all the way through to come back around to the parking lot to the same spot.
See,
they
I totally
throw it in
disagree.
reverse, they turn wide, and they do other things that otherwise cause conflict. And
You know, I just got to say it. I just totally disagree. I with it is that Pulling into the other aisle when you have to try to get into parking, to get into a straight, going into oncoming traffic, backing up in other people's bumpers. And I just totally disagree with your concept of the fact of that that's going to be easier pulling straight into it, and people aren't going to have more of a confusion doing it when they have oncoming traffic and you're pulling into it to get into your parking stall. I just think the angled parking is just a way to go inside of it, just for ease for the whole thing.
I'm not sure which I say, so I'm not going to talk about angled or straight parking. I understand your point because I drive a truck. I've had SUVs. Straight-in parking is you always end up going in the other lane in order to get into the, you kind of, one way or another, you're crossing lanes.
There are
but-
options in all of the concepts, though, that would allow for straight-through parking that wouldn't require you to take a turn.
Okay, but I didn't want to get into straight-through
Okay,
parking.
yeah.
No. Dollar signs are interesting, but they don't tell me much of anything.
Right.
What are you, $1, $2, $3, $4. If that was the whole difference, is $4, I'd say let's spin the wheel. I'll chip in the $4. How much of a difference is there in the price among these options?
What we're gonna, and I'm probably not gonna answer that question to your satisfaction. I'll just start off with that. What we're looking for tonight is really conceptual basis on a lot of the topics that we're touching on already, and then we're gonna take these back and design them to fit within the budgets that we're working with city staff. So some of these scenarios, obviously we've laid out sort of an order of magnitude from $1 to $3 or dollar signs. We're assuming and working through conceptual pieces right now based on the hardscape that's provided in some of these options that it's very likely, and the plaza pieces, that those are going to be a more expensive concept than concept number 1, which is basically just asphalt with a couple islands and a little bit simpler design. So we're certainly going to be working towards that, and a lot of the concepts that we look at will likely have alternates that perhaps get selected or broken out so that we can make sure that this thing fits within the city's required budget.
And one thing I'm missing on all of them, and maybe I'm just not understanding it, none of them seem to be particularly welcoming or directing people towards walking towards Mequon Town Center 1, or at least I'm not seeing how it does that. I think the comment that I've gotten from many, many people is, great, you're redoing that parking lot, but you're still not fixing Mequon Town Center 1's parking, because they don't believe this is part of Mequon. It's separate, and partly it's the mental thing that it's not.
Right.
Is there a way to try to make it more welcoming, inviting, I don't know what the term is.
Sure.
To get people to realize that that's part of one parking lot?
Right.
I'm not sure there is.
Yeah,
but
it's how do you engage this particular lot up to the Mequon Town Center piece, and I think it has some struggles because of the grade difference. Obviously, everybody knows there's several feet of grade difference between the City Civic Center lot and the Mequon Town Center lot that we did several years ago. I think what some of the features that can happen are these pieces. So when people ask, how do you engage or how do you make it part of this, I think the features that we see actually in this particular concept 3, sort of the functional piece here that allows for users really to, it's almost as if this is part of this piece here. We're not going on to the Mequon Town Center property to, create signage and arrows and paintings and whatnot to bring them down here, but at the same time, if there is signage, it can allow for users to come down here. The interesting walkways, things that guide you up to this. Right now, it's just sort of an asphalt area. It really, to your point, it really doesn't, you don't really know that it's there if you're up on top, or if you're down below, that there's something up at Mequon Town Center. If you have interesting pieces that sort of guide you there, walkways, colored pieces, whatever they are that sort of create interest, maybe it's a tree-lined street or a parking area that really guides you into there, the lighting itself, interesting pieces, bollards that maybe come into here are all ideas that would engage people to walk along this pathway.
So my view, and it's probably a minority view, is all of those, that picture you showed early on of the nice shaded parking lot, I've never seen one, other than maybe up at a state park, because these trees we plant out on these little tiny narrow things are never going to get big enough to have shade. At least none of the ones we have in Mequon are that way.
Sure.
They just tend to be little sticks standing out in the middle of parking lots. They get in the way of snowplows and people walking. A lot of sidewalks that you put in parking lots are expensive and nobody ever uses because they're on the edge of the parking lot, or, I mean, I think it's striping is more cost effective through the parking lot in a safe place than walkways along parking lots, because nobody uses them.
Normally, I would agree with you on that topic. In this particular scenario where we're down in this area and there's a slope on the south side and the baseball diamond on the north side, I do feel that people are going to gravitate, because there's a drive aisle there, I do feel that they're going to gravitate to these walkways to bring them to the town center or over to the trail system. Of interest is the picture that you noted is exactly correct. These are, we've sort of noted it here as a comment. It takes 30 years to grow, a 30-year-old tree. So this is depicting that. Obviously, these aren't going to be planted. It's not going to look like that, but it takes time to get
But
that
we
shape.
have trees that are 30 years old that don't look like that. I mean, they're 40 years old because they get stunted, because they're in a 3-foot wide area surrounded by impermeable surface. Trees aren't meant to grow like that.
Yeah.
And so I'd have fewer medians and more larger, more, if you're gonna plant trees in the middle, don't have that long green thing, have a little bigger green thing that actually a tree could grow in. Like all that stuff. I think more parking, I think less cost. You talk about colored pavement and stuff, I'm a skeptic because I know the mayor and I voted against it, but we have supposedly colored pavement out here in front of the city hall, and you can't see it. It was a big, gigantic waste of money. So, striping or maybe some brick, and then the rest should be asphalt, so that it's cheaper and easier to replace when you do it. Now, your Wisconsin Club calming device, essentially putting a speed bump in the middle, great idea if it worked. I mean, depending where you do it. I'd rather spend money on something like that than fancy paving in a municipal lot. And I'd rather get more parking, rather have, but by the way, to all 4 of these, if this was a private developer, and I'm directing this to the Director of Community Development, if these came before the Planning Commission by a private developer, are they all approvable? Are we meeting our own
We'd have to engineer it first,
requirements?
but yes.
That was the intent.
From a dimensional standpoint, yes. We haven't calculated green space on any of the options yet.
Okay.
But I mean, obviously with the treatment and the placement of the trees, we're getting some shading, which is a 10% requirement.
Yeah, well, there's never any shading anyhow, but yes, I understand. I just don't think we should be hypocrites and approve something for ourselves that we wouldn't approve for somebody else.
Certainly.
I'll be pretty short, only because I don't need to talk that long, but I do agree 100% with Alderman Meyer on the angle parking. I just think that people will go to McDonald's if it's on the right-hand side of the road, but not on the left-hand side of the road. The more convenient it is, the more draw you're going to get. You're going to get a draw down there. And what if I came in there with and I don't drive a truck. I don't like straight parking. Angle parking, I will be gravitating toward. I can go down there, just slide right in, slide right out. So I think it makes quite a bit of difference just because of the convenience of it. And we have an older group here, and it's hard to turn around and look at it. Not all of us have the fancy stuff where you can see where you're backing up to. But I always worry about backing into somebody or somebody else pulling out. It's just a lot easier, more convenient. If you lose a couple spots, you can add some more green space. But I agree 100% with Alderman Meyer on that.
I'm mentally gravitating towards concept 2 because I think the south walkway is an important feature. We're trying to get people to come that direction anyway, in general. I think having to wrap all the way around to get to a walkway is gonna be difficult for a lot of people, especially if they have small kids. I too like angled parking. I think there are challenges though with the way traffic flows in this particular lot. Because you can't go, especially to the lot, the exit to the south, you're only turning right when you come out of there. But lots of people drive in that way as well to get to this lot. Sometimes I won't even bother turning, and I'll come in that way because it's quicker at certain times of the day. But then I'll automatically be disqualified from being able to park because you're going to want to make those angle parking spots on the southern extension line up with the exit to the south, because you can only make a right turn out of there.
Correct. Essentially, the lot becomes a circular traffic pattern, one way only. So it would logically probably be something like this. So
And that's going to be counter to people driving straight through. Maybe that's good because it'll slow them down. But I think you'd have to look at traffic patterns before I'd go off. And don't get me wrong, I like angled parking. It's much easier to park. But there are some challenges with the way this whole site has been assembled over time and the way things are that might make that not as palatable. I'm encouraging you to look at it if that's the general consensus, but I think when you think it all the way through, there are some challenges. But in general, I think 2 is a good blend of not just having a whole asphalt runway. Gets you some of the pedestrian and bike connectivity we're aiming for. Doesn't have any fancy pavilions. So it maximizes space at the same time. It's kind of checks all the boxes, gets you most of what you want. It's still got slightly more than the traffic counts or the parking count study said we needed. I don't think we should go below what the parking study said we should have. We paid a lot of money for that study, so we should heed the suggestions in it. Those are my general contributions. I won't go on anymore.
I'm just going to put my 2 cents in also for the south pedestrian way, because I think that's an important element. I also want to say that some of those other elements, such as a plaza, et cetera, I don't think are needed for this site. And I also like this because I think it does give you some visual connectivity with Town Center 1. I don't know what you can do about that grade there between the 2 levels of Town Center 1 parking lot and this. Is there anything? Because I feel like that might be one of the impediments of people. Currently, people walk right down the center of that, which isn't very safe. So I'm hoping you can at least direct them to one side or another for getting between these 2 areas so they're not walking right where the cars drive.
Unfortunately, the grade, we probably, we'll be able to address the grade on the site itself a bit. But this grade, that's the lot line is essentially down here, so probably not going to grade on their property or raise that up. But I do hear what you're saying as far as the pedestrian travel piece and trying to guide them or hold them on the walks as much as possible.
Right.
I think that other than the traffic flow and the parking, I agree with Alderman Worth that without a dollar value that's associated with your numbers on there, with your dollar signs, it's hard to talk about a lot of these issues. And I think if you know that one's a $1 and one's a $2 and $3 and $4, you know what those dollars are. And I think you should make us aware of that and be forthcoming in that. I mean, you knew enough to put that dollar sign there. There has to be a range that you know that's what that is.
At this point, we did not create any estimates. We're simply looking for the guidance about how it's going to be laid out. For those reasons about some of the pieces that are going to be added in here as far as some of the amenities and those types of things, if there's a strong consensus for focusing on a plaza, focusing on a lot of the green space or those pieces, then we would focus our design on that. So rather than putting it forward on these pieces, I think that's where we were gravitating towards, just sort of general order of magnitude. We have to fit within the budget as it is anyway.
Mayor?
Yeah, the most expensive one will be harder to fit within the budget. A couple of comments I'd like to make. I think we don't want a through drive aisle you know, this is supposed to be pedestrian friendly, it's supposed to be for people that are coming to the venues here. So a through drive aisle is counterproductive. I think we want to maximize pedestrian connections and the pedestrian ways with the 2 sidewalks. I think the crosswalks from the parking lot should line up with Town Center 1, so when you're walking, you know that that's where you're going or coming from, instead of having to jog. I think that makes the connection more important if you line that up. The thing about angle parking is interesting. When you go into a parking lot that has angle parking, you have to go, or you're supposed to go, in a circle. They usually paint arrows on the cement, and so if you go into the first aisle, it's full because that's where everybody goes first, and the one around the corner is empty. So being creative, I usually go the wrong way, and I don't drive a pickup truck, so I can swing around 270 degrees and park my car. So I think angle parking, I think you're asking for trouble, not for me.
We'll be okay as long as
Because
you're
I
not
don't care,
parking
because
there.
I'll always know where to park, and I'll come and go either way because it's not enforceable by the police. So, no, they won't, they'd never enforce that. So, those are my comments. Alderman Strelcher.
Just one quick comment. What none of us have addressed yet is that when the Legion came forward to discuss the parking issue, they're really limited on parking. A lot of the overflow parking goes in front of their space, and they do have veterans with disabilities that are parking downhill to get up that hill. So as we're addressing the south and the furthest east spots, let's make sure at least, those are maybe level going onto the sidewalk and has some access. Maybe they're not handicap spots because it's not next to a building and it's not handicap appropriate, but they're at least handicap accessible. That handicap thought has gone through that, and then whatever we can do to make that pedestrian way easier to get, up that hill. If there's something that we can do to partner with Locre to maybe mitigate some of that issue with the hill. I mean, I wish the parking lot wasn't on the east side, or the sidewalk wasn't on that east side on that ramp going up. I wish it was on the west or on both, because that'd give you ability to, not have to cross traffic for those individuals to get to events at the Legion.
But to be clear, the driveway from our parking lot to MTC 1 will never be ADA accessible. So
Technically. Right.
So we can guide people there, but they'd still have to either come out to Mequon Road or out to Cedarburg Road in order to receive a ADA accessible access.
Right.
I think I get what you're saying, is maybe the ability to have some adjacent parking next to that drive, at least that area there that allows them, so that they're not parking over here. Maybe there is some space that's perhaps adjacent to it.
That you can get to the sidewalk a little easier, in that space would be helpful. You're the expert. Just, there's the feedback from the Legion from a couple months back, and if we can help them out, it'd be great.
We'd love to, to emphasize Kristen's point, having done that piece over there, that slope is pretty steep. Without some additional amenities on railings or switchback ramps on that drive to technically make it truly ADA accessible, that's what it would take. So
right.
I think we can make some concessions on the actual parking lot piece, but to be valid or to be accurate, it probably will not be ADA accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I know no one's really brought it up, but I do like the idea of the plaza, or some sort of plaza element that leads toward the baseball diamond and the pool. I just think that'd be a nice feature long-term for the area. Alderman Worth?
The rails you were mentioning, and I don't know what a switchback is, but I mean, those could be put in. I'm sure that, we ought to do whatever we can do there also, if we can put rails up, something up that ramp, even though that's coming off of this. I would guess that the developer of that.
That's not our property.
Oh, but I'm guessing, first of all, we have a cross easement with them and a shared parking arrangement with them.
And
we're
negotiating that.
Yeah, there's some negotiation there. So I would think that we'd have some ability and some leverage with them to do that, particularly if we're not paying for it, if they're not paying for it. Secondly, what is the benefit of that little parking lot? That just add spaces, or?
This piece here?
Yes.
The piece there was to provide ADA accessibility immediately adjacent to the building. We know that there are some users that have to come through the back of the building here to get to council chambers. And the ability to have special parking here. That could be either staff parking or could be short-term parking, different events, those types of things.
I just, would you have more or less parking if you took out the area between the two?
This piece here.
Yeah.
And one of the other reasons is it shows up in some concepts is that we've got this unique angle that happens right here, and we need to get through here to preserve this connection as well for service and other pieces. If we didn't have it, you could probably, create this scenario. And actually, we sort of have it in concept 3. It looks a little bit like this, where that parking lot piece just pushes forward into here. And that could keep pushing, to answer your question. You could keep pushing into there and extend the parking into that area. So this is very similar to the other concept. The only difference is that it's rotated. But the thought being that perhaps there were some city staff or other users that might want a dedicated parking space over there.
I guess I thought we weren't doing that, that's why. Raise the issue if we get more parking without it.
Just one final, unless members of the common council object, I think there is some interest to see what it would look like with angle parking. If we can get a concept for that, how that would work out there.
We really need a straw poll vote. We've got to move forward with final design, although.
How long would that take you?
Bring them at the town center, the special meeting that's to discuss the town center financing. Am I? Foxtown at that meeting?
I'm not following you on that.
We've got a special meeting that we're trying to schedule for the end of the month here. She's wondering if we could
Can't wait a
add
month to bring it back.
I can't wait a
as part
month
of
to
that.
bring it back and still be able to deliver a parking lot by the end of the year. So
But maybe at that meeting.
at that meeting, we could bring back a
You gotta
concept
bring it
plan.
back with, we gotta bring back the thing with costs and everything on it for the meeting, correct?
Well, we already have our budget based on the funding sources. So we already have a finite definition. We would just design to those anticipated funding sources. So we'd put it out for bid and then we'd bring it forward for award, but at that point, it's already designed.
So could we have a design concept by that meeting?
That's what I asked you.
Yes.
Just tell me when that meeting is for my
I
own
don't believe
benefit.
it's been set yet.
Okay.
But,
As long as it's not tomorrow, it should be okay.
No.
It's at the end of May or first week of June.
Yes, correct. We're still waiting on a couple of responses. We should have a
Question
date
for you
tomorrow.
on angle parking. Let's take one row with parking on both sides. Can you have angle this way, angle this way, so traffic can go both ways?
In theory.
Yeah, you
In
could.
theory?
You
In
could.
theory.
That would really promote people.
Provoke people?
Promote people trying to, do just what you were describing, your own parking style.
Or pulling in the wrong way.
Or backing in.
Instead of people pulling in front, that people would not have the opportunity, so they just back into a
Right.
parking spot and cross
works.
lanes of traffic.
Yeah, I would do that.
I think angle parking's a bad idea.
So we can do a straw poll on whether we want that or not, or do we need it, or you can just have it by then?
I wouldn't mind hearing what the tally is, but that's my own preference. My professional opinion would be to utilize a 90-degree angle. And I'm not discrediting any of your comments about the ease of parking in it. It's all about the traffic flow within this parking lot and how people will try to get through here in the future. If it's a circular pattern, it's gonna be, you're gonna be waiting for people to get out. And I understand you're gonna be waiting if somebody comes out of an event anyway, but at least at that point you can get through. So those are my thoughts and experience. But I'd be interested to hear what.
I think you're gonna wait either way for when you have it angled, or you're gonna have it, I think you'd have less of a wait if it's gonna be angled than it is somebody going in and out, trying to get.
You may
this other
not
straight
actually. If you've
parking.
got a 26-foot wide drive aisle, you can back a car out and still drive by.
Now, I wouldn't have that argument with if you had 10-foot stalls, but you have 9-foot stalls, so.
That is true.
Well, that could be feedback. We could change them to 10-foot
That's
stalls.
actually what I was just gonna ask, is what the
Drive a
difference
Prius.
in terms of if you did 10-foot versus the angle, how much, I mean, is that a solution? I know in Germantown, the standard is 10. and-
Yes.
Our standard is 10, but we allow everybody to build 9.
I like
Okay, the idea of a straw poll was to see a concept of angle parking,
Correct.
not to go with a concept of angle parking. Okay, who wants to see a concept
Well,
of angle parking?
everybody's gonna wanna see it.
I was more curious on the reaction to the board as far as the members of how many people preferred angle
Right.
parking.
So that's what I'm asking. If you want to see,
Question than what he's asking.
huh?
You're saying, do you want to see it?
We're gonna
I might
assume
wanna see it,
everybody
but
would
I
like
don't
to
think
see the
I don't think
concept.
I prefer it.
Oh,
Right.
Ask quick clarification on the angle parking. For those interested, is it everything angled parking, or is it mainly the
Don't
middle
mix.
section?
Please don't mix, that's worse.
Okay. Never mind.
yeah, you're supposed to drive around in a circle,
Well,
so it's
I was
all
talking
going to be
about
on
the
an
stuff
angle.
along the interurban trail.
You don't necessarily have to have that angled.
You know, and if angle does take too many spots out, what would it do with the 10-foot stalls? You know, just to have that to discuss.
Sure.
We may prefer the 9 because we want to maximize it, but what does 10 mean?
Okay.
I'm guessing you're giving up about 10%.
We want it.
Yeah,
Plus or minus.
mathematically speaking.
Depending on where they fit, yeah,
Okay.
on average.
So there's a straw poll on angle parking. Not do you want to see it, but do you want it? Is that what you're asking
Yes.
for?
Correct.
All right, who wants angle parking? Raise your hand.
I don't know.
3.
Until you see it, you don't
I
know.
got a truck,
Yeah,
so I
I'm
don't
gonna-
know.
No.
different.
They'll show it to us, but they want to know who wants it.
I think enough of us want to see it, just to see what it, if it balances out.
You can show it to us, right?
Sure.
Sure.
Yes, you bet.
He wanted to know how many of us actually wanted it.
I think what happens with angle is you wait less to back out, but you wait longer to pull around to get to where you need to go.
And you meet me coming the other way.
Yeah. Look out for the mayor.
You're gonna run cowboy anyway.
Give him a
Do
12-foot
as you
spot.
wish, buddy.
I guess in the interest of small straw poll votes, if you wouldn't mind, I think I counted consensus that the majority like concept 2, but could we take a straw poll vote on the preference of concept 2?
Versus.
We don't have to vote on all of them, but
I
mean,
like 2.
Yeah, 2's fine.
2 or some variation thereof.
what's the variation?
Well, this isn't going to be exactly it, right? But
Well,
in
correct.
general, yeah.
Why did I have them all pulled out and they look great before and now?
Like if you wanted to flip the special parking and tweak it a little bit.
Like concept 3?
Well, I think the only advantage to flipping the special parking is that you can line up that sidewalk directly with,
Like
I mean, the
this.
rest of concept 3 with the raceway going through the south.
The right side of concept 3, so to speak.
Maybe.
The-
I don't know if that works, but it does line that sidewalk up with the town center sidewalk a little better in the spirit of trying to invite people to go that way. But you may draw it, it might suck. I don't know. I can see it in my head, but once you get down and actually draw it, sometimes it doesn't work well.
Yeah, I like 2 or 4. With a lean towards 2. I like the extra city hall parking in 2.
Okay.
You know, and I think as the developments increase, we still have preserved the usability of city hall for the residents to come in and get the services they need. I mean, we need to make sure it works for business as well, so.
Mayor, take a poll.
Kristen, you have a question. Did you want to ask us?
I was looking for a straw poll vote on the preference for concept 2.
Raise your hand if you like concept 2. I think there should be some modifications to it, but.
Two-ish.
Like angle parking, two-ish.
Like sweet angle parking.
Like the
or
sidewalk
10-foot
should
wide
line up.
stalls.
Yeah, is there a way to do that with concept 2, but trying to make the walkway line up so it's a more straight shot to Town Center 1, which would be all on the other one with the
Like 3
drive-through?
without the drive-through.
Yes, there's a
Sure,
way.
yes.
Yes.
Yep.
One from 2, one from 3, and a small plaza from 4. And low cost.
Think it's safe?
You like 2?
Okay.
How
Thank
many did
you.
you count?
I counted 5.
Whoa,
Somebody
we
got
got
an
a
elbow up.
discrepancy.
Raise your hand if you like concept 2.
Oh, Worth changed? We got 6 then.
Okay.
I don't know.
He's flip-flopping, but.
No, I'm not a parking lot designer. I think parking lot designers ought to design parking lots, not aldermen.
Yeah, but we'll get the heat when it.
We just like arguing with people that give us transportation ideas. That's the problem.
Thank you for your time and your comments. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting up with us.
Great. Say that more often.
We don't have a date for that meeting.
Pretty easy.
Not yet.
Okay.
Still working on it. I got no comment.
We're now going to reconvene as a common council and take up ordinance 1518. Amending the city zoning code to rezone the property located at 11649 Northport Washington Road from B3 office to R6 suburban attached residential, and to change the city land use plan from office to residential plex and office. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in March, and the first reading was at the council in April.
Move approval?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Alderman Stralchek?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Bathroom.
Absent.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Urban?
Aye.
7-0, and that is adopted. Ordinance 1515, ordinance amending Chapter 2 of the Mequon Municipal Code relating to the accrual and use of paid time off by employees. This was recommended by finance personnel in February, considered at Common Council in February, recommended by a finance personnel committee again in March, and the first reading was at the Common Council in April.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion?
Just a question. Not on the whole concept of it, but going down to second paragraph at the bottom, and just how it reads, upon notice of resignation or retirement, employees are entitled to pay for all unused PTO. Should it read to be paid? Not to pay for?
Well, to their pay.
Pay for?
That would be the correct way to state it, yes, but it's a memo trying to explain the
So-
concept. It's,
It should say to be paid for?
yes, it should.
Okay. That, and then also, it also states the same thing on the second page. Also, it states in the first paragraph, as employees are entitled to pay for all unused,
To be paid,
be
correct.
paid for.
Correct.
It's the memo.
Entitled to pay,
Those edits are fine with me.
entitled to be paid. It means the same thing. Okay. Any other discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy?
Yes.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Yes.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Urban?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchek?
Aye.
2
Six ayes,
yeses
2
and
yeses.
6 ayes, and that's 8-0, and that's passed. Ordinance 1516, amending Chapter 2 of the Mequon Municipal Code related to sunset of the paid time off donation policy. This was recommended by finance personnel in March, and the first reading was at the Common Council in April.
Move to approve.
You seconded, right?
We have a motion.
We have two motions to approve, but no second.
Oh, second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Moving on to resolutions, number 3528, a resolution combining wards 13 through 15 in Aldermanic District 6, and combining wards 16 through 18 in District 7 for election administration and reporting returns. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Welfare.
Public Welfare took up Resolution 3528 and unanimously approved it, so I recommend approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That resolution is adopted. Resolution 3515, amending Resolution 2959 concerning policies that outline the city's financial management
Move
practices.
to table.
Second.
Motion and a second to table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is tabled. Resolution 3529, authorizing certain officials to execute a subordination agreement for the city's mortgage on property owned by Spectrum Investment Center, LLC, in connection with a revolving economic development loan made to Spectrum Investments. This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
8-0, and that resolution is adopted. Resolution 3530, authorizing an amendment to the 2018 Employee Compensation Plan in connection with establishing the position of Fleet Superintendent at pay grade 15, eliminating the position of Chief Mechanic at pay grade 11, and eliminating the Buildings Foreman position at pay grade 9. This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3533, approving a service agreement with the Office Technology Group of Milwaukee, Wisconsin for information technology managed services at an estimated annual cost of $42,600. This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Brian Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3531, awarding the 2018 road improvement contract to Payne and Dolan of Jackson, Wisconsin in the amount of $588,387. Recommendation forthcoming.
This was voted on by Public Works and passed 3-0.
Thank you.
Recommended 3-0.
Need a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Alderman Nurbin.
Go ahead. I'll answer. Go ahead.
I read what the memo said, but I'm wondering, does this effectively mean that the additive bid items will not occur? It's quite unclear to me. And at what point would we make that determination? Would it come back here? I'm concerned about not doing the safety improvements
Well,
particularly.
we talked about that at committee, but go ahead.
The recommendation is just for the total base bid. The shouldering would still be done, just not as a part of this contract. As you may know, Payne and Dolan's price was twice as much as the second low bidder, so we would look to either do that in-house or otherwise sub for the shouldering work. So the shouldering work would still be done, just not as a part of this contract. Because of the timeline that we had for the contract, we issued the bike improvements as an additive while we were also seeking approval from the Ozaki Interurban Trail Council, which they denied. So our proposal for what we were calling a chicane there was denied, and we are not allowed to implement that improvement in that location.
What were you calling it?
A chicane, the
A series of curves, yeah.
So is there anything there's nothing we can do?
Not as a part of, well, I mean,
Yeah, no.
not as a part of this contract. They've recommended additional signage. Unfortunately, we haven't found that to be successful up until this point, but we're not recommending any improvements then as a part of this contract, but we could obviously go back at a future time if we come up with a different solution to address that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3532, awarding the contract for the demolition of the Logan Community Center to Shoreline Contracting Services, DBA American Demolition, in the amount of $89,638. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Works.
This was also taken up by Public Works and recommended by vote 3-0.
Thank you. Motion?
Discussion.
We need a motion.
Move approved.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Discussion. Alderman Garrell.
I hired this company with DNR permits and city permits years ago. It was one of the worst experiences I've ever had with any contractor in my life, and we went through heck with this. I make a decision on every dollar the city spends. Would I spend my dollar that way? Is that a prudent way to do it? Also, I said, would I hire this contractor? I would never hire this contractor again. Never deal with this contractor again. I have mounds of court documents, and so does the WDNR. So I won't vote for this contractor if he has a problem. And you do have a problem with him. I've never seen him before. Kristen said that they've used him before, but in my 4 years, I haven't seen anybody hire this contractor, so the price might be the lowest, but I learned that bidding on price sometimes isn't always that reasonable.
Any other discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
No.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Aye.
7-1, and that resolution is adopted. Resolution 3534, authorizing execution of a professional services agreement for completion of a fleet right-sizing and replacement analysis to Mercury Associates Incorporated of Rockville, Maryland, in an amount not to exceed $23,959. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Works Committee.
Yeah, that was also recommended 3-0.
Thank you. Need a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Stralchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3535, a resolution approving the purchase of a replacement police K-9 vehicle from Ewald Automotive Group of Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, and associated equipment from General Communications of Milwaukee in the amount of $38,028. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Safety Committee.
That was recommended 3-0.
Thank you. Need a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nerben?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. We have no specified unfinished business, no petitions, memorials, remonstrances, or communications.
I want a remonstrance.
Under specified miscellaneous new business, we have mayoral appointments.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Appointments are approved. And then we have a closed session. Convene into closed session pursuant to section 19.85, paren 1, paren G, Wisconsin state statutes, conferring with legal counsel for the government body who is rendering oral and written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. This is the Ville du Parc litigation update, and then we may reconvene into open session to take such action as deemed appropriate.
Move to go into closed session?
Second.
Motion and a second to go into closed session. Call the roll.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Brian Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Kathleen Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nerben?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
8-0, and we're going into closed session.